Hello, beautiful humans, and a warm welcome back to the Surrey Art School studio as we prepare to embark on cycle 3 of our summer season theme, Insectarium. And today, and for the next 2 cycles, we are going to be looking into the magical and mystical world of beetles. And oh my goodness, have I enjoyed putting this tutorial together for you. Apologies for the slight delay. I did have a few technical issues yesterday. But yes, we're going to be looking at beetles, not bugs, beetles, and there is a difference there. And in this first tutorial, we are casting quite a wide net in terms of how we explore the magical world of beetles. So as usual, we kick off with some anatomy, and beetle anatomy is really interesting and important actually for this cycle, understanding those key features of the beetles, and I will explain them. So that we can recognise a beetle from a bug. And all of these beetles belong to a particular order. It's the Coleoptera. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And I'll share loads about that during the tutorial, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. So yes, we kick off with some beetle anatomy, and I've given you a few little fun painting tips for your basic beetle that you're going to label. And then we are going to delve into the wider world of some very beautiful beetles. I think they're very beautiful, which we're going to draw in pencil and then pen, and then we are going to play with colour. So it's not an in-depth beetle painting tutorial today. It's more of a sort of voyage of discovery into beetles that you might find in the UK. And we're going to have a lot of fun just with exploring their different shapes. There are some fascinating shapes that we find when we draw beetles, and so that's why I wanted to take a wide view at them today. So we're going to look at some of those shapes, look at some of those key features, and then we're going to have a go at a little bit of colour mixing as well. I'm going to keep it short and sweet because I've slightly overrun with this tutorial as well due to my enthusiasm and wanting to look at so many different beetles today. But I'll be back with you in cycle 4 in a couple of weeks, and in cycle 4 we'll do some more in-depth studies, watercolour studies of beetles, looking specifically at iridescence, because how could we not? How could we not when we look at the world of beetles? So I really hope you enjoy the tutorial today. As I said, I'm not going to speak too much more. I'm going to allow you to dive in now, and I'll catch up with you again in cycle 4. Please do continue to share your work. I am absolutely I've loved seeing your slugs and snails. They have been fantastic so far. And just a reminder as well, in the summer season, we don't so much feel like sitting indoors. Take your sketchbook outdoors, print your worksheets off, sit in the garden, have a nice cup of tea, listen to the birds, even if it's a rubbish weather day, which we're getting a lot of lately, and just sort of be outside and do this work. You know, with these little sketchbooks, it really lends itself to that, and I really want to encourage you to sort of bring your practice into your summer world. That's all I've got to say. So much love. Hope you enjoy the cycle. Thank you for your patience with this one, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Okay, my loves, let's make a start on cycle 3. And for the next couple of cycles, we are going to be looking, as you probably know from my intro, at beetles. And beetles are absolutely fascinating creatures. There are about 350,000 known species of beetle in the world, but that doesn't mean that there are many more that are still undiscovered. They've been around since the dinosaur era, so about 295 million years, and we have about 4,000 different species of beetle in the UK alone. So much food for thought, so much for us to learn and discover, and so we're going to spend a couple of cycles on beetles. And in this first one, I want to kick off just with some beetle anatomy again, because I think these investigations into the anatomy of these creatures are fascinating, and they can also help us to learn a lot more about how we draw them, really, because it's about understanding sort of where things are in the body and then where they might appear. So there's a few little sort of misconceptions with drawing beetles that I'll address during the cycle today. But we're going to start off with just a very simple beetle study, and it gives us an opportunity to use the shadow violet, which you've got on your palette already. And I'm just going to talk you through the basic beetle anatomy. You will find an image something like this on your resources that you can work from here. But because beetles come in so many different shapes and sizes, it's quite hard to find one image that represents all of them. But there are some common things about beetles that we do know. So we know that all beetles have a head and a thorax, and they also have an abdomen. So that's really easy. Beetles normally have, now I think they normally, I'm going to say normally, but I think it's a general rule, they have 6 legs and they have teeth. And they will have 2 eyes. So those are things that are definite knowns about beetles. As well as that, they have 2 sets of wings. So they have the elytra, which are the hardened forewings, which sort of sit like a shell on top. And then underneath, they have these softer wings that they actually use for flying. So you'll see something like a ladybug will open up that top shell, and then these little wings will pop out and it will fly. So these top wings are not used for flying. They sort of protect what's going on underneath. And then there's some real similarities between humans and beetles as well. They do have a femur, a tibia, which is very similar, and sort of similar joints in a way to humans, wrists and elbows and hips and whatnot. So there are some quite distinct similarities between us. But it's the range of different colours and shapes of beetles that I just find absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to talk you through this study here really quickly, just a sort of method for how to get this down onto paper nice and easily. We'll add a little bit of colour to it, and then obviously you can label it. But as we're going through the process of this tutorial, I recommend having your beetle anatomy sheet to hand so that you can sort of be naming the parts as you're drawing them. It's a really useful exercise, that. So as I'm sketching the head, I can sort of be saying, oh, that's the head, and this is the thorax, and this is the abdomen. But also, as I'm sort of sketching the wings, I can say, oh, this is the elytra. These are the segmented antennae. The best way to anchor that vocabulary in your minds is to speak to yourself in your head, or to look at the sheet and to sort of be constantly labelling as we go through. And that'll make more sense as we get into some of the other beetle shapes. But let's just get a basic beetle down on paper now, okay? So all you need is a pencil, and I'm just going to work with the fine liner for this, and then your subscription box colours if you've got them to hand. Otherwise, just a Payne's grey would be great, okay? So again, just for ease really, I'm working on just a blank sheet of watercolour paper, but you could just do your study onto a little segment of watercolour paper and stick it in. I actually did mine straight into my sketchbook, but I just don't want to keep repeating those pages, so I'm going to talk you through how I made them rather than repeat. So with a beetle sketch, it's helpful to run a little line down the centre to begin with. It just helps sort of keep things in check left to right, because they're quite symmetrical, and it's really noticeable if you sort of go out of alignment with them. And then for the head, I'm just going to sketch a loose oval shape like this, a little sort of squashed oval shape. For the thorax, I'm going to sketch an oval again, but I'll chop it about a bit. And then for the elytra, on this particular one, there's a little gap. Those are the hardened forewings. And then I'm going to sketch another oval, like sort of longer oval shape. Okay. So when I'm sketching like this, my hand is anchored down on the page. I'm moving from the elbow. My wrist and my fingers aren't moving. I'm keeping things nice and loose. So we just want those loose shapes to begin with, and then we can start to cut away at them. And you can do this either in pencil. So I'm going to probably leave that head as it is, but I'll just add in some extra little circles for the eyes. Beetles tend to have 2 eyes, I know that. And then I'm going to put some little fangs in, because that's what's on my sort of source image, and some little lines in for that. Sometimes they have just some of the stuff I've been observing has just been fascinating. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode for noticing the shapes in beetles. It feels a little bit like you're drawing robots. I feel like I'm drawing robots. They are incredible. So for this soft shape here, I'm just going to flatten it off a bit. So I'm going to flatten it here. I'm going to carve away at it here and carve away at it on the other side to create more like a sort of shield-like shape that I'm seeing in the source image. And then here again, I'm going to sort of slightly flatten the top, and I'm going to probably cut into that ellipse that I've already created. So notice here, I've done those big loose marks, but here I'm sort of working finger marks or wrist arcs to get that curve. So I'm using the wrist now and moving my fingers. And the same on the other side. And you may find it easier on that opposite side to bring your paper all the way around and sketch from the other way, okay? Just makes it easier to find those curves and to match those angles if you're sort of drawing inwards rather than away, if that makes sense. So now we have our basic beetle shape, and then we need to really notice where we can see the legs coming from. So we're going to put the legs in now. So the first set of legs are coming out from here, and there's like these really interesting sort of loose, almost oval shapes that connect, and then what you tend to get is like little segmented pieces for the last bit of, shall we call them the forearms just for ease, but for just that last part of the leg tends to be segmented, and sometimes it has like a little claw on the end, which I think is super cool. And then the next set of legs, I can actually see them popping out from around here, which is unusual because, and I'll get into this maybe a little bit more later on, but we would imagine, well, we know that the legs are actually connected to the thorax, which is this area here, but quite often the elytra, or this back hardened shell, will cover parts of the thorax. So if you look at it from the other side, the beetle's going to look really different. So these legs that are coming out here are still connected to the thorax, which comes down to about here. And this is what I'm saying about learning this stuff is very useful, the sort of where things are and how they appear in all of our beetle drawings. And then these other legs are coming out sort of here, but again, we know they're actually attached to the thorax. So if you look at the beetle from the flip side, which you can do when you look at the worksheets, you'll notice that they are still indeed all attached to this area here, which is the thorax, okay? So really worth noting, and it will improve your beetle sketching if you understand where on earth these legs are coming from, and it sort of makes sense of that rule. There we go, so just little pointy bits there. So what I'm going to recommend for the whole of this tutorial is that you really pay attention to your pencil sketch, or what's going on underneath your underneath the surface of your drawing. So with this pencil sketch, you want to get everything in line and looking correct. And that's the beauty of sketching, is we can sort of sketch, change angles. They always have this sort of split down the middle as well of these winged areas. It's in different ways, but there's always a split down the middle. Or some beetles, these two are fused together, but for the most part, there's a split down the middle. So just making sure that your drawing is balanced from left to right, making sure that your legs are popping out from the right places, that you haven't crowded all of your legs into this top thorax area, which is a common sort of misconception in drawing, which I found fascinating to learn about. And just putting in these shapes. I've got a whole page about beetle shapes, which is on the resources, so do have a look at that. Getting everything in the right place, getting really happy with where that's at, and then we can pen, okay? And when we pen, we can do that nice and slowly and mindfully. You can use, I've got a dark grey pen here. This is what I used for the sketch, which is in my sketchbook. And now we can sort of start to find that true drawing. So once all that hard work of observation is done, this I find really soothing, which is just working back over the drawing and sort of crispening it up with the fine liner. We're going to be doing a lot of this today. We're going to be following this process a lot today. So this is just a practice run with this, come on brain, with this little beetle anatomy study. And if you want to do the same thing I'm doing here with the back of the beetle, you are welcome to. There are lots of options for expansion here. So there's a reason why I'm not looking at one particular beetle straight away. I want us to understand the key characteristics of any beetle. And then as we go through the later parts of the cycle or into the fourth cycle, we'll be digging a bit more into the detail of that. So I'm just going to do this really quickly now. Just finish off penning this image. And then I'll meet you back once we have penned. And I'm going to, once I've done the penning, rub out all of the pencil marks that I have. Okay? So I'm going to speed this up now, add a little bit of music for you, and you can work away at this in your own time. Okay, so here's my little beetle anatomy study, all penned up, which is really nice. You can use any fine liner for this, by the way, but make sure it is waterproof. And these are fade proof as well, which is quite nice, so anti getting sort of faded by the sun. So if you're going to do a piece that you wanted to keep for a little bit longer, then it's quite nice to have that. Yeah, so you make sure they're waterproof because it's really nice to be able to get that drawing down and done. And I feel like that's the hard bit. And then the painting, or the colouring in, shall we call it, I think is the really fun bit in comparison. So there are so many different colours and shapes and shades that we're going to look at in the next part of this cycle. You'll see why I think it's really fun. So I have actually done this on watercolour paper, which makes life a little bit easier for this next step, because I'm just going to get some shadow violet now, because this was a grey, well, I'm just imagining this is a grey beetle. This is my generic beetle. So he could be whatever colour you choose, really. Doesn't really matter. Also, it doesn't have to be a he. It could be they or them. Might start calling this one they or them. So, after all, it is Pride Month. Anyway, I'm just waking up the paint here. So it may look a bit dramatic what I'm doing, but I'm just tickling that shadow violet, I haven't really added loads of water, but I'm just working at that paint to wake it up now. So I've actually got quite a nice thick mix. Now that I've got that ready, this is where, yeah, like I said, the watercolour paper is actually quite handy, because now I can just wet down the elytra or the abdomen. I'm going to wet that down completely. And when you're working wet on wet like this, it's really useful to wet down the paper a little bit and give it a minute, give the water a minute just to soften into the paper itself. So what we don't want is lots of water on the surface here. That would not be fun. What we want is just to give that paper a minute to absorb some of that water, to dampen it off, and then if we need to add more water, we can. We want it so that the paint will move on the surface a little bit. So I'm just wetting down the head, the thorax, the abdomen. And then I'm going to take some of that lovely shadow violet and I'm just going to drop it in to the surface and just allow that to split and spread. Now, this is just sort of student grade watercolour paper, but it should do the trick here. And what I was aiming for here with the shadow violet, what makes it a bit more fun, is to add the shadow violet and let it split. And then not only do we get textures, but we get some very lovely beetle-y colours. So we were working with these on Sunday at our sketch social. We were working with shadow violet to do our dragonfly wings. Because watered down lots, shadow violet can be a really nice, subtle, almost translucent tone. But like this, you get not just greys, but you get pinks and blues. And one of the things we're going to be looking at cycle 4 in more depth is iridescence in beetles. So this is a little taste of it, really, where we get multiple colours showing through. So this is just the only reason really why I wanted to show you the painting version of this one, is because I wanted to recommend that you have a little play with your shallow violet here, and even sort of start to play with leaving little highlights, because the thing, like with the slugs, that's really interesting about the beetles is the sheen on them, the highlights. And I know that some of you, for slugs and snails, have found some really effective ways of doing those highlights, but we can do them through painting as well to a certain degree. So it's all about just leaving little gaps. So quite often with beetles, you'll sort of darken the edge a bit more and then allow things to be a little bit lighter in the centre. We may darken just around that meeting point of the wings, which is what I'm just doing now. But then we're going to leave a little highlight in the centre. So it's getting the balance of pigment right in order to make things appear a little bit more 3D like this. It's getting the balance between light and dark right, or larkandite as I like to call it. And I've not got a reference picture here, so I'm just playing, and I recommend doing the same. But when you're working wet on wet, it's much easier to retain those highlights. So I'm just going to clean my brush now, and the best way to get blends between light and dark areas is not to pull from the dark area, it's actually push from the light area. And you get a really nice subtle blend from doing that. So I know this is just cycle 3, page 1, chapter 1, but we might as well be flexing our skills a little bit here, even when we're doing things like our beetle anatomy. And honestly, I sat in the garden doing these the other night. I really recommend a bit of, I know the weather's crap, but I really recommend a bit of garden practice at the moment, because even though it was cloudy outside, I had my hummus and my crisps and a little drink, and I sat there with my cardigan on, just listening to the birds, just working on my beetles. And it was very, very calming, and I know that it was doing me good, even if I wasn't sitting in the blazing sunshine that I would have liked to have had this summer. Yeah, so mental health and well-being perspective. Practice outdoors if you can. If you've got a little bench or a table that you can sit at, absorb some of the energy of the summer whilst you do your work. So there we go, there's a little sort of semi-shiny beetle, just for fun, a little bit of play, and then obviously you can use the worksheets now to label your first little beetle study of this beetly adventure that we're going to be on for the next couple of cycles, which I'm very excited to share with you. So I'm just taking really diluted versions of that paint now on my brush and very roughly colouring in. This is inner child joy, colouring in beetles. And we are going to have so much fun colouring in beetles over the next couple of cycles. I'm super excited to share that with you. So just pootling along, colouring in my legs, and I'll leave the rest of that to you. I was actually really enjoying it, that's the problem, but I know I need to stick within a limit for timing. Okay, so stopping there, I will let you fill out the rest of the page. Maybe you can stick your beetle into your sketchbook if you want to, if you worked on watercolour paper. Label it up, get familiar with some of that language, you know, and not just the language of things like the antennae, but the femur, the tibia, the tarsus, all those things really, really useful in deepening our wisdom and understanding of these wonderful beetles. We have so much that we can learn from them. They've been around for a lot longer than us, let's face it. Okay, my loves, stage 2 of this wild and wonderful operation today. You will find on one of the next slides of the resources a page with 6 different types of beetle on it. So these are beetles that I found on a list of interesting beetles. And I just love the variety of these beetles. I love the variety of colours, the variety of patterns. Most of them are native to the UK, apart from the rosemary beetle. And I'm going to be honest, I don't actually have any suggestions on how to paint the rosemary beetle yet. I haven't got that far. But that's okay. This is like a sort of, a learning journey for all of us, right? So the rosemary beetle, I'm putting it down as a challenge. If anyone can figure out how to paint the rosemary beetle effectively to create all that sheen, then, I don't know, maybe there'll be a little prize in store for you. Perhaps we could have this as a bit of a competition. But I just wanted to talk you through how I created this page, really, and then we're going to do that together. And I will talk you through some of the challenging elements of sketching these particular beetles and a little bit of colour mixing. But I'm not going to give you all the colour mixing on this because this is an adventure that we're on, and I think it would be fun for you to explore and learn that for yourselves. And you'll notice on the next page, I have just got lots and lots of notes on the different shapes and the different patterns and the different textures that I've observed during the process of creating these drawings. And so that's why I want us to look at a whole range of beetles at this stage, because that's really going to inform our later practice. So I'll talk you through the ones I've done. I'm going to give you some tips and suggestions on some of these guys. And then I want you to have a go at them and to have a little play and see if you can find, if you can sketch them, and perhaps if you can find a way to match some of the weird and wonderful colours on them as well. And like I said, it's something that we can sort of share together as a community and have fun with. So I really welcome your responses to this as well. So let's get started. All we actually need is a pencil to begin with, and I used a black fine liner, but you can use whatever you like, okay? And I'll talk you through the process. I'll talk you through some of the weird and wonderful shapes. Let's get cracking. Okay, folks, let's dive into some beetle sketching technique. And I'm not going to show you all the beetles, but I will just show you some tips for capturing some of the weird and wonderful shapes, some approaches for keeping things in proportion, because that can be really helpful. And just addressing some of the really interesting shapes that I observed by sketching this whole selection of beetles. And we'll come on some colour. Just before the end of the cycle, we'll talk about colour because we can have so much fun with colour. But to begin with, let's just look at shapes. And I'm going to start with the stag beetle, so I'll just pop him there. I'll just pop him there. 2B pencil just for sketching. And for the stag beetle especially, I found one of the challenges was making sure that I didn't make this bottom half of the body or the abdomen too long in comparison to the thorax and the head. Gosh, not that difficult, Ellie. So one of the things you can do, what I found really useful, is first of all to draw a line down the middle of your beetle, or where you're going to sketch your beetle, because they are really symmetrical left to right, and it just really helps to have that line to check with drawing. We were saying before that we put these lines in and then our minds just, I was saying this on Sunday, that our minds just actually ignore the line. But no, it's there, and it does help as like a little visual cue for us. So I'm also going to draw a box around the whole beetle. You don't have to do this for every single one, but I've seen other people do this, to be honest, and we learn through others, don't we? And I thought it was actually quite helpful because I'd been having those issues with proportion. So then I'm going to draw a line here, and that's going to be for where the top of the claws sort of come out. A little line for the head, a little line for the thorax, and then the rest should be sort of the base of the beetle, I suppose, although I could put another little line just for where that beetle ends. And again, you can measure. So if I measure from the top of those little claws to the top of the abdomen, it's almost the same as the whole rest of the length of the beetle. And this is the thing that I've been having issues with. Or if I measure just this bit here, it's actually the same as the abdomen. So I just need to bear that in mind when I'm doing my sketch, so that I don't end up with a really long abdomen. So I'm going to pop a line there for the base, for the base of the abdomen, and then the legs will come out from there. So the head is pretty easy. I'm just going to sketch a sort of elliptical shape. Again, I'm keeping my fingers nice and still, and just creating a sort of soft squashed shape. And the width is about similar for the thorax. So the width of that ellipse is similar. And then what I almost want to do is sketch like a whole ellipse here, just to help me find the shape of the abdomen. Okay, so you can see those shapes coming together now. Then all I've got to do is sort of chop in at them a little bit. So here, I'm going to come down. Now we're on finger marks. So just coming down and sort of squaring off that shape a little bit of the head of the beetle. It sort of goes down and then up again. And again, that line left to right might roughly help. I've sort of gone a bit squiffy already, but that's okay, but it is helping a bit. And then like a sort of a long cylinder shape for the abdomen. And then, no, sorry, for the thorax. Dear, oh dear. And then I'm sort of flattening off the sides of that ellipse a little bit to create this sort of half shield-like shape of the abdomen, okay? And then running a line down the middle of that anyway to separate those two hardened wings, and sort of trying to find the right place for that. It does split ever so slightly at the bottom here, and there's like a little V shape at the top. So these are all things worth noting on your stag beetle. And then when it comes to the little, what are they, like sort of clawy bits at the top, they've probably got a technical name, but I can't think about it right now. I'm just going to draw the angle of the top line because they cross over. And a little bit like when you're drawing something like lightning, I'm then going to cut in and cut away to create that claw shape. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. It's a little bit higher up on this one. And those are the main shapes that you want to be observant of, I think, with the stag beetle. It's that proportion between the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. It's that the funny little shapes of those front pincers or claws or teeth or whatever you want to call them. And then again, we've got some quite interesting shapes going on with the legs. So do have a look. I've done a whole page on shapes, which you can have a little look at here. And I don't always have the right language for these shapes, but if I put in this bit of the leg here and here as well, you've got like a sort of cone-like shape that's cut away at. So it starts off smaller and it gets a bit wider before we get to those little separated bits, which I can't remember the name of this morning, but you can look on your sheet. So it's sort of a cone-like shape, as I said, but it's got little spikes coming off it as well. So it's really, they're such interesting shapes. Like I said, we can learn so much. Segmented, that was the word I couldn't find before. We can learn so much from these weird shapes. And I was saying before, I don't know if I said it in the previous clip because I've got a bit lost on my clips now, but it's a little bit like drawing robots. It reminds me of that. So I'm not going to draw the whole of this stag beetle. I'll let you have a go at the rest of it, but do notice as well, right at the end of those segmented parts, there's like little claws. So make sure you put the little claws in. A lot of them have it actually. They're teeny tiny little claws. And then also sort of what I was saying in the earlier part of the tutorial, just making sure your legs are coming out in the right places, okay? So that's the stag. I'm going to do two more beetles. Or I'll do a couple more beetles because I want to talk for too long about drawing, but it is quite important. So the rosemary beetle, all you've got to think about with this one is just doing a sort of big egg-like shape to begin with. So I won't go fully into it, but I'll just do the egg. Egging. So a big wide egg. Flatten it off a little bit at the sides. Use that ellipse to help you find the base curve. Split left to right, curving the top. So little finger marks here, curving the top of the sort of wing area, or that hardened wing area, the elytra. And then these bits seem to sort of split as well in terms of pigmentation at the top. That really does remind me of a little egg shape. And then you've got your segmented antenna coming out of the top, and you're going to make sure you've placed your eyes in the right place. So that's about as far as I'm going with the rosemary beetle. But again, do notice the thighs. I'm going to call them thighs. Do notice the shape of those thighs. It's like almost like a droplet shape, and it looks really similar to a human thigh. So when you're drawing in that little leg sticking out, you want like almost like a drop shape, sort of droppy shape. And then after that, you've got these very strange little sort of cup-like shapes coming off it. You have the same on the dung beetle, so it's a little bit easier to see on there. They're like little cones, and there's 3 of them in a row, and then the And then that's the end of the strange foot. So antennae, but also really noticing, I can't again think of the technical name of that. I can actually. The femur. I think it's the femur, or maybe it's the tibia. Whichever, it's got a sort of human-like shape, okay? Green tiger beetle, I'll do that one quickly. So here again, you might want to draw a line down the middle. I'm interested in the shield-like shape of the green tiger beetle. So I'm going to do a little ellipse at the top, just for the head. Another one below. It's actually a little bit smaller than the head. You know what it is. You can fill in the gaps there. Totally gone out of my mind. Isn't that so funny? I've been saying it for days and days and days. I can't not have a look now. The thorax, for goodness sake, Ellie. So head, thorax, a little bit more flattened, and we can carve away again at that shape. So it's that general to particular sketching again that we're looking at here. Nothing new, but we're just applying it to a new subject. And then when it comes to this shield-like shape, I still would be tempted to sort of sketch an ellipse and cut away at it. It just makes it easier to find some kind of shape to begin with. So once I've got that, I can put in those straight lines either side. And then this shield-like shape gets a bit wider at the bottom. So I'm going to straighten my lines here and then put them in at a bit of an angle so that my shield is a little bit wider, not that wide, a little bit wider at the top than it is at the bottom. And again, then just paying close attention to things like the little teeth that come out here, a bit like the stag beetle. You can sort of put in the angle first and then from there cut away to create those little claw shapes. It just makes it a little bit easier to keep that proportion. And the antennae on this one are really strange. They sort of come in and go backwards, which I really rather like. So let's put those in. And again, once you've done that, you can always segment them as well. So good. One more. I'm going to do the wasp beetle. Last one. There are so many interesting ones on here. The swollen thighed beetle. I think you can have some real fun with the ellipses on that once you get to it. But I'm just going to do the wasp beetle here. So very small sort of top head bit with a couple of eyes sticking out. Then we've got like a circular shape. This really reminds me of a bumblebee, this bit. So it's a circle there. And then again, we have this like shield-like shape, which I absolutely love. It's a beautiful shape. I don't know why, my brain likes it. And then once we've done that ellipse, we sort of flatten off the ellipse a little bit at the top, straighten up those lines a little bit as it sort of peters down. We're going to do that gap between the wings. And then there's just an extra little add-on here. And then yet again, you've got this sort of like, there's like droplet style shapes going on the, oh Ellie, on the femur. It is the femur. And then we have the tibia that comes next, which is again, that sort of widened shape. So all I've been saying is the word shape throughout this whole little sketching activity. Shape. And that is it. It is really, this exercise is all about paying close attention to the really interesting, weird and wonderful shapes that we find in these beetles on this worksheet. And again, as I said before, probably, I'll say it again, you don't have to do them all. I really enjoyed doing them all. I haven't finished them all, haven't coloured them all in yet, I'm going to be honest. But that's going to be a really nice little activity for me to do. I'm looking forward to it. And a good creative challenge as well. But the ones you have done now, pen them, please. So, and when you are penning, actually, just worth noting, when you're penning, if you see any textures, you can add them at this stage. So on the rosemary beetle, there are these sort of rows of dots that run all the way down the centre line of the elytra. Sometimes it rolls off the tongue. And they're like in pairs. And if you put them in, even if they're in dark and you're going to add light to it afterwards, just for this exercise, if you put them in, they start to show the 3D shape of the shell. So they're well worth putting in when you are penning. Same with this guy. He's got some patterns on his shield. Put them in at this stage. Put the shapes in. and we can add colour to them in the next part of the episode. But if you put the shapes in, then they are ready to go, ready to paint in the next cycle. And again, the same with this, when you're penning, you're also sort of almost joining those shapes together. You're refining the drawing a little bit in this process. And something like the wasp beetle, do go in and draw out the shapes now, because it means that when you get to the next part of the tutorial in very shortly, all you've got to do is the colouring in. So all the drawing's done by then, and when I meet you back here and you have done your penning, you will only have to colour in, which is such fun. So there we go. I'm going to give you a moment now to work your way through the beetles of your choice, and I will meet you back here. I'm going to give you a few tips on colour. I haven't solved every single beetle yet, I'm not going to lie, but I have got some suggestions, some fun suggestions for some of the ones that we've already had a look at, okay? And some of them, I'm going to leave them as a little challenge for you, as I said, like the rosemary beetle, because I'm just like that. Okay, I'll meet you back in 2 secs. Okay, folks, let's talk very briefly about colour now. And I just want to be clear, this cycle is not about doing in-depth watercolour studies of beetles. We are going to go into more depth in the next cycle. It'll be probably more purely watercolour. But this is just an exercise in fun and colouring in and exploring and understanding the different shapes and colours that all reside within that family of beetles. So I'm going to speak very briefly to the ladybird, because obviously you could do a whole tutorial on the ladybird. But I just wanted to say to think about the reds that you use for the ladybird. So you have got your cadmium red in your palette, and you have got your crimson. This is crimson or vermilion or something. And I much prefer, that's all I've got to say really, I much prefer the crimson as a base, because it's a much richer, deeper red. But automatically we might be drawn towards the cadmium red because it's a little bit yellower. You could put some cadmium red as a base, of course, and then you could work a little bit of crimson over the top. So it might be nice to have a play between those colours, because you do want some orangey hues on your ladybird. But you also want a little bit of richness. And then in terms of highlights, things like a jelly pen would work really well at this stage. We'll get into watercolour techniques for highlights in more depth, as I said. And then the last thing I want to say on something like the ladybird is paint it first and then do the pigmentation in pen. Because if you paint over the top of your pen, it actually dulls the pen. But if I come in now and work over the top, you can see my pen really nice and clearly. It's not being sort of flattened by a layer of colour. So that's all I wanted to say on the ladybird. I wanted to talk about the stag beetle next. I'm going to do that very quickly. Stag beetles are black, but they're not just black. They're black and blue and purple and all sorts of different tones. So I would tend towards, rather than reaching for the black in my palette to colour in my stag beetle, I would be more likely to reach for something like indigo. And I've got some indigo on my palette left over from Sunday. So, because we did dragonflies on Sunday. So if I just go and get a little bit of my indigo going, can you see it's like a nice deep rich blue? And I could add a bit of my black to that maybe to make it like a blue black. That might be quite nice. And I might also want to consider bringing again a bit of crimson into this, putting some of that on my palette. Sorry, I've realised I'm really wonky. I'm just thinking about the painting and not so much about the filming right now. I'll try and do both. So if I add a little bit of indigo to my crimson, I get a really nice rich purpley tone as well. And again, you can either work wet on wet when you're adding your colour, or add, I'm going to go a bit thicker than that. Add quite a thick amount of colour to the edge of your beetle. And you can do that on all of them. Clean your brush, so just water now, and blend towards the middle, and you'll automatically get a nice highlight. So that's my vibe really. You can also get the same thing by going wet on wet, but I just wanted to show you this real quickly. So pulling towards the middle, I get a nice little highlight, a bit of a sheen to my beetle already. And again, just working that out. So putting that thick paint down, wiggling out with the brush, pulling that paint towards the centre means we're getting a nice dark area. I've slightly overdone it on that one on the edge. We're getting a nice dark area. I'm just going to put a bit more dark blue in. And we're getting some nice little natural highlights coming through on the paint already. What's the purple for? I would pop a little bit in the centre. Just gives it a little bit more of an iridescent vibe, and we'll really get into that iridescence in cycle 5, but just wanted to give you that little tip. So again, I'm not going to paint all of it. Nice easy one. Oh dear, just made a little mess on my page. Nice easy one. I'm really conscious to try and keep this tutorial not being too long today. Nice easy one, the wasp beetle. Now I've got him drawn out on another sheet, so let's just grab him quickly. There he is. The one I just drew in the previous part of the tutorial. So on the wasp beetle, you've got this nice vibrant yellow, and then you've got sort of orangey legs. So we did a bit of working with brown as being a version of muted orange. If you get just the lemon yellow on its own, and you get that out on your palette, I find that a little bit stark. So I would go to your other yellow in your palette and mix the two together. Or for me, I mix together Hansa Yellow Light and Hansa Yellow Deep. So I'm just warming up. In fact, I'm going to take a bit of that oranginess. I'm just warming up that yellow a little bit. I want a slightly warmer yellow, and it's somewhere between the two. So, and then you can go in nice and delicately and add your yellow to the different parts of your wasp. So that's a really fun bit of colouring in. I'm just using a size 6 brush here, but you can use a smaller brush if you need to. And then when it comes to the legs, just a little bit of cadmium red works really well here with that yellow. So you're just tinting the yellow that you've already mixed, and you can use that to colour in the legs. So again, just a little tip from me there. And the rest of that wasp beetle, I actually did that with my fine liner, because with the fine liner you can create a bit of texture, which I quite liked. See my not colouring in within the lines today. I'm not bothered, it's okay, I'm just getting paint down. With the fine liner, you can get some really nice textures on the top of the body. And it's just a lot easier than painting with black paint, because you get a nice, even, deep, rich consistency. So again, this is a nice little mindful colouring in task, something to do when you're sitting in the garden on a warm summer's evening, getting your bug on. You just get a nice, rich, flat black from that, and I enjoyed putting a bit more texture in that upper half of the body. So that's just a few tips on stag beetle and the wasp beetle for you. I'm going to talk very briefly about iridescence, but I'm aware, sorry I keep changing sheets, I'm aware that some of you might not have all the colours for this, but in the spirit of that indigo again, if you guys have got indigo at home, and if you haven't got indigo, then Prussian blue with a bit of black should get you to a nice, rich, similar tone. I'll go back to my indigo now, and again I'm going to make it nice and thick. I've got plenty of indigo left over. This is what I do at the end of events now, is I just gather up all the paints onto one palette and then I use them, because flushing them down the sink just felt so wrong. So again, you can do that same thing here, where you add nice thick paint. Oh yeah, I'm doing the bloody nosed beetle, by the way, now. You might not think this is exactly the right colour, but there's a reason why I'm doing this one. So I'm adding that nice rich tone underneath, pulling towards the centre again, so I'm getting a bit of a highlight as I get towards the centre. I'm just doing the same on the other side. It's funny actually, once you've done all the hard work of drawing these out in proportion, the painting just feels so easeful in comparison. And then just like I said, drawing towards the centre, drawing towards the centre. Getting a nice blend on that paint. So whenever I'm putting down the paint nice and thick, cleaning my brush, and then I'm just adding water. Just adding water. And moving that paint around. And we might need a couple of layers on that, I don't know, to get it to the right tone. And then again, you might not think that indigo is perfect for this. You might want to go for something like a cobalt blue. Experiment, that's what our sketchbooks are here for. They're sort of a chance for us to play and experiment with different colours. Not this place of perfection that we seem to want them to be. They're a place to record our observations And yeah, play, have some fun with it. Okay, so that's the base. That's the base on the bloody nose beetle. It just needs to dry for a minute. So I'll come back to it. Okay, I'll come back to it. And in the meantime, I can talk to you really quickly about the green tiger beetle, because this one, I was like, how do I get to that green? How do I get to that green of the green tiger beetle? It's quite an interesting green. I'm just trying to find my sheet so we can have a look at it. So it's an emerald green. And I've watched a few green painting tutorials myself, actually, just to sort of get a vibe for it. And I actually think that the sap green that we've given you in your pan palette, in your subscription box colours, might be a way to get to it, even though it doesn't seem like it. So that sap green has got something of the emerald in it, but I think it needs mixing with a different blue. So let's try it just quickly with a bit of cobalt blue. Oh, not bad actually. Oh, too much. Okay, so I've just added a bit too much cobalt blue, but that's not bad. And let's try it with ultramarine and see what that looks like. This is very slapdash colour mixing here, but you get an idea. Okay, so that's a little bit not quite the right tone. So I'm feeling the cobalt blue from that so far in terms of what I've looked at. But you could try a few different blues with that sap green. There's my cobalt again. And see if you can get the right colour. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting a little bit closer to it. I wish I had some Serpentine Genuine, because I feel like that is the absolutely perfect colour for it, but it's not quite perfect. So again, there's a little challenge for you there. Can you mix a really good green? You could also try taking a sap green and adding something like yellow ochre. So again, I'm just doing this straight onto the page just for ease and speed, because I know I haven't got very long. I've already overrun. Okay, so yellow ochre is a little bit meh. But sap green and a little bit of lemon. Try that. Oh, that's better. So this is what I want you to be doing in your sketchbooks, is playing and experimenting. And I think that's sort of, actually, now that's drying, that's not too bad. See if you can get to that emerald green. That is my challenge to you. And then for a bit of fun and a little bit of sparkle on it, you could actually add some of that, what is it called? Interference green. You could add a little bit of interference green over the top. That will give it a little bit of a shimmer. So all of this is play and experimentation. I'm just going to finish off the beetle, the bloody-nosed beetle. I wonder why he was called the bloody-nosed beetle. So now that this is a little bit drier, I've got some electric blue left in my palette. You may have some interference blue at home. Those of you that have been with me for a while, you could try that too. This electric blue is really cool. We just discovered this. We've been using it for dragonflies. I wanted to show it to you. So if I add electric blue over the top of my bloody-nosed beetle, in some of those sort of shiny areas, I just think it just gives it such a zing. So this is what I did in my sketchbook. Little bit of that electric blue just over the top just makes the whole colour pop a little bit more. So again, with these glazes, you should wait until the colour underneath is completely dry, and then you're adding like a thin layer of it over the top just to give it a little bit more punch. So just play, experiment, have fun with this. Your beetles do not need to be absolutely anatomically perfect. We are not botanists or whatever it is. We're not scientists here. We are explorers, creative explorers. So just have fun with it. So I'm sorry, that was about 1.5 speed all the way through, but it's because I wanted to give you some starting points. And I'm also quite hyper this week. Hyper or exhausted, both of those things at the same time. So I hope you've enjoyed that little whistle-stop tour. I just invite you to play and experiment with this. If you happen to have some of that electric blue at home as well, it worked really well for this swollen-thighed beetle, or even the interference blue should do a very similar job. So that's it. I'm going to stop there because I know I've run out of time. I will see you next week, and in the next cycle we're going to be really delving into iridescence. So just a little taste of it today, but next cycle is all about the iridescent baby, and I cannot wait for that next chapter with you. So much love.